Hello and welcome to Getting Lost with me and my good friend.
Dan, who is completely lost about Lost.
And so, episode 4, Walkabout.
Yep. So,
Uh,
episode 4, Walkabout. In complete contrast to episode 3, I thought this was a great episode. And I think it's because, the complaint I had on episode 3 is that it didn't either add to or address any of the mystery. While this episode added tons to the mystery and explained explained some bits and pieces, but basically just made it, this is way more interesting in terms of what the episode actually did, even though it was still a character-based episode and it was entirely focused on one character. It probably also helped that the character in question has, through the pilot and episode, are we calling this episode 4 or episode 3?
So this is technically it's episode 4 because the pilot is actually kind of...
So all through the pilot and episode 3, you're basically getting ominous hints about Locke. Yeah, he's been geared up as a mysterious character. So the second you sort of go, actually got to focus and find some bits out about him. And what you find out is really interesting. It's obviously a lot more appealing.
Obviously, it's massively Locke focused. And I think, there's a reason why Locke definitely was one of the more popular characters like in the show, because he's really intriguing. Because obviously you get like you say, he's been presented as this kind of mysterious character as we first kind of see him in this episode, like in the real time kind of setting. Like he's very kind of like, I'm gonna go hunt. He's like throwing knives around.
I thought there was absolutely brilliant little few sequence where you get introduced to him again, basically by a knife flying beside Sawyer. Beside Sawyer, and you're like, well, where's that come from? And then he's immediately sort of, this is my bag. My bag. I'm taking charge of this.
He's basically got he's got the hero shot where he's center frame.
Because you've literally got all of the rest of the cast basically in a line, all turn around to face him on his own type thing. He's sort of instantly competent and all the other bits and pieces. And at the same time, a little bit scary when he's like, I've just got a whole, didn't just have one knife. I've got a load of knives. And then you get this brilliant sort of cut to the flashback where someone asked the question, who is that guy? I think it might, something to that extent. I can't quite remember the exact line. And then it cuts back to sort of a real close-up of him. And then he's sort of picking up the phone and he's like being addressed as Colonel, and it's all mysterious type thing. And then it goes out to the wider shot and it's immediately a scene out of Office Space, complete with TPS reports and all the other bits and pieces. And it's like, wow, that is genuinely, brilliant, the way that sort of panned out, where you're like, this mysterious guy, he's suddenly this massive hero. He's going to be the sort of really backwater hunting guy who's going to be really interesting. And he's like, is he from the former military or something like that type thing? And then you instantly get this sort of contrast where it's like, nope, hold on. And you're like, what? Hold on, everything I know about him is now what?
And I think the Locke flashbacks in this episode work really well on a couple of different levels. I think obviously there's the massive kind of character difference, and that he's this really kind of put upon, bullied kind of individual. And I really like some of the touches they put in. Like his manager at work is bullying him. It's like a man who's much younger than him. I really like that scene where he's on the phone and he's talking to the woman, and you kind of think, is it like a family member, a partner, or something? And then you realize it's like a chat line.
It's like some kind of paid for chat type thing, and all like this sort of bits and pieces. So it again sort of does it like builds him up to immediately kind of knock him down again. It's like the sort of tempo of the way they
I like all the way they kind of build on that throughout those flashbacks. But I think the really clever, the way that I really like it is they keep obviously the big twist at the end of the flashbacks really well hidden right until that moment.
By the way they frame the things and all of the sort of positions, and the fact you always see him sat down in very normal situations type thing for what's going on. And I mean, it's interesting because I think I was sort of suspecting it before the actual reveal type thing. And because there are a bunch of like little hints that, you know, because when I went back and watched it a second time, you sort of pick up on the hints. And you're like, oh, did I pick up on that first time? I'm not really sure, type thing.
Yeah, and there are definitely hints in the trying to have like the non-flashback where it's like he's wriggling his toes right at the start.
Yeah.
And
well,
again,
that I thought was brilliant because the way they did that was they did it like if you know what's going on, that's the natural thing to have occurred. It's like, oh, I can move my foot type thing. But at the same time, when you don't know what's going on, it's also a case of because they had him in socks, it works because it's like you kind of think, oh, he's just like, why on earth am I wearing my shoes type thing? Because that's the first thing he does. He looks around and finds some shoes and puts the shoes on. And so it's like slightly odd, but they immediately offer a sort of rational explanation as to why you've got that shot in the first place. And you're just like, well, there's only mysterious things going off. Somehow his shoes have blown off in the crash or something like that. So I thought that the way they did that by still making it, giving you the shot of what it would be like for the person sort of coming around and go, oh, I can move my feet, what's going on type thing. But given this sort of plausible reason why, oh, that makes sense. That's actually something completely different that you sort of associate with that.
And then I think, to get further in, I think the one that really starts to make you so kind of suspect, because definitely by the time you get the final flashback, you're starting to think something's off. But I think before that, the bit that really starts to make you think that is when he's been knocked over by the ball.
Yeah.
And it takes him a long time to kind of get back up. Yeah.
And that's the bit where, and it basically does the exact same shot again, with the focus on the foot. And that was the bit where I think that was the bit where I sort of went, okay, what's going on here in terms of, is he somehow, an invalid or something type thing, but you're not really sure. And there's a few other like little hints, both in the flashbacks and on the island. So like in the flashback that he references the guy who lost his legs and climbed up Everest type thing, which, on the face of it is just an inspiring story of someone who's told you to do something and doing it type thing, but actually is almost directly related to.
Because that's quite cleverly framed actually, because that bit of dialogue, that's with his, like the manager that we've seen, like kind of basically bullying him earlier.
Yeah.
So kind of the impression is that Locke has referred to that story because he's giving an example of how people can kind of excel or whatever that you might not think be able to. And he's kind of interpreting it in a way, well, basically the manager is saying he can't do it because he's like a loser or whatever.
Yeah.
So you don't actually make the connection between like the physical disability and the story that Locke mentions.
And you also get like, there's a few shots where you actually see the wheelchair as well. That's the other thing that is sort of on the second time around, because they use it to like move things around and so on. And there's a few sort of shots where you sort of see it around the same place that Locke is, and it's like, So there are a few other little bits and pieces that sort of hint at it.
And you kind of slowly realise, well, there's a wheelchair there, but like you've not seen anybody use a wheelchair to this point.
So I thought that was sort of really well put together in terms of how they built up to that sort of twist. And the twist itself is like, you've effectively created so many more mysteries as soon as you've introduced it. Because normally, like, you do a big twist and it's usually like a reveal.
Yeah.
And it is a reveal, but it's just asking way more questions than beforehand. Because you've obviously got first of all, there's the how's he got cured type thing. But then you've got the fact that, well, from the flashbacks, you know that he's only had it for 4 years. So you're then asking, well, what happened 4 years ago? Because clearly he has a level of competency and a level of familiarity with hunting and things like that. So that doesn't seem like put on, especially as he goes and kills the wild boar on his own and drags it back and sort of demonstrates that. So you kind of think, well, there's clearly something in his past where he probably was an outdoorsy type person type thing. And so you're sort of wondering what's going on. And then you've got all these nice little bits to his character. Like he's got the repeated line of, don't tell me what I can't do, which sort of adds to what's the bits and pieces going on there. And you see people sort of inadvertently telling him, oh, he can't do that. Like when Kate says, oh, you can't.
Definitely, yeah. And Locke is fascinating. I think even like, from this early point, he's a really interesting character. And there are like little touches as well, which I think really help. It's obviously portrayed as a result of the crash, but the fact that they kind of have him with the scar across the eye, kind of really helps build that kind of sense of him being quite dangerous, I guess, or quite.
Yeah, because you've got this like almost.
It's like a kind of it's like a scar a Jack Russell character would have in like an 80s action film.
Yeah,
Snake Plissken kind of.
the Snake Plissken scar. You've got all of these sort of bits and pieces that he's somehow dangerous and other bits and pieces, but at the same time, like the while the interactions have been somewhat strained, he's been incredibly kind and considerate towards Walt. He sort of, the first thing he's doing is he sort of whittles the
whistle. The first thing you really see him do is whittle the whistle and whistle the dog and then it's not only the fact that he brings the dog over, he actually ties Vincent up and then kind of says to Michael, I think it'd be really good if you bring the dog over.
So there's that sort of interesting, he's immediately a very interesting person in terms of, he was clearly a little bit mad in the flashbacks but you can see why in terms of like his struggle and all the other bits and pieces. And while he says, I've lived with it for 4 years, that's a relatively short space of time for a person his age, especially.
Yeah.
In terms of, he's clearly had another type of life before that. And some various things have happened that seem to have caused him to be, working in the demeaning job, not having any kind of relationship outside of, the phone operator type person type thing. Coming up with this idea that, that he was going to do this walkabout, which was his destiny. And then sort of being massively frustrated that he can't do it, being told he can't do it, and that's probably another thing as well, because that puts him in Australia, and they were saying, "Oh, we'll give you a flight back to Sydney," type thing, but you don't know if there's more that takes place. After that interaction, did he actually go and do something? He was clearly flying back to America from Sydney, because that's where the flight was going, type thing. But you don't basically see the resolution to that sort of conflict of I can't go on the walkabout type thing.
One of the other really interesting bits that adds to the mystery, which is quite easy to miss, I think, sometimes, is what happens. How did he survive and come out of the jungle? Because there's quite a big thing made up of Kate saying, "Oh, I saw the monster heading like right."
Yeah, we haven't talked about the monster or the guy with the white shoes at all so far. That's the other two big things. So the kind of
the big other thing connected to Locke is and then Kate is basically, she's telling people that Locke is dead because she's so convinced that he can't have survived encountering this monster. And also you have there's a little bit of kind of fainting going on in the production where often they kind of portray the boars as kind of making a similar sound and kind of shaking foliage in the same way as the monster. So you're not clear. There's a scene where Locke is staring down like some trees just in front of him, which are shaking. Yeah. It's not clear. Is that a boar or was that the kind of...
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I sort of looked at that, and you've got what Kate and Michael saw, which is clearly the big thing moving through this mysterious monster that we're not entirely sure what it is type thing. And you then get this cut to Locke. In my mind, it was fairly definitive that it wasn't a boar because he's looking upwards, like very, very clearly upwards. And he's got a sort of shocked, sort of intrigued almost look about it. And what's interesting about that is I sort of formed the view, okay, he's seen whatever this thing is. And he's asked about it later, and he says he didn't see anything, which is interesting. So, what is it that he's seen, and why isn't he telling people what it is, and why didn't whatever it is eat him? And you do have that sort of potential ambiguity. It's the boar that he's killed type thing, but it just didn't. In my mind, that didn't seem to stack up because of how it was shot, with him looking decidedly upwards.
That's a thing they do quite often in the series, is there'll be something like that which seems odd, and they offer you up like an explanation, but there's enough in there that you think, well, that doesn't fit, like that's too easy. So they kind of balance it out, but they kind of said, oh, it could have, like, this could be what's happened. That
does seem to be, I mean, it's a similar sort of device to the whole having his shoes off thing, where why is he doing that? Oh, here's a sort of rational explanation type thing that you can take away and leave you as the audience as to whether or not you want the logical, sensible, with lack of a better term, scientific option, or you want the sort of supernatural element to it in terms of, there's something clearly monstery or demony going on here type thing, and you can sort of do that. I mean, I'm definitely leaning more towards the supernatural element at this point, because as I say, it just didn't seem to stack up the sort of bits and pieces with this, whatever this monster thing that knocks down trees is, that just didn't seem to be a bore. So it's clearly something else. And the fact that Locke didn't talk about it makes it seem more mysterious, like it's something. And you then got what I'd call, I guess, shouldn't be the first, like visual, weird, supernatural possible thing going on, which is the man in the sort of black suit, white shoes, which Jack's the only one who sees. So I guess you could argue that it could be just Jack going a bit nuts type thing. But we haven't had anything that suggests Jack going a bit nuts at this point in time. And he sees him on 2 separate occasions. And on the second occasion, he effectively leads him to Locke. Sees him, he goes into the trees, he follows him into the trees, and he immediately comes across Locke. So that's kind of the first bit I can think of where you've actually seen a visual representation of something possibly supernatural going on.
I think aside from the monster, that's the first time that there's a mystery that's really like in your face, obvious.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because you have like other mysteries that are there, like the weather is clearly.
The weather's clearly wacky. You've got the weird transmission going on. All these.
But those are things that could possibly, like the weather could just be like tropical weather, like, and obviously there can be, a fairly classic explanation for the signal. Could just be like another plane crash, like years ago or whatever. So the kind of mysterious figure is like the first, aside from the monsters, like you say, it's the first time that it's clearly something completely, kind of supernatural.
And it's visible. So like the monster, you've always been, they've hidden the monster. You see the movement of the trees, you see the effect it has. But this is one where, you can pause it and go, it's definitely a guy. And he's got very white shoes on and he's in a suit somehow. Again, all of these seem very out of place type.
Right. I'm getting the feeling that you rewound and froze that. It's like, should I see it? Connected, I think, to some quite nice little scenes as well with Jack and Rose, who was the lady. The lady he was sat next to on the plane.
Yes, I wasn't sure what her name was, but yes, and she sort of, because she does a few different bits and pieces. Because again, it's the sort of Jack sort of reluctantly taking on the sort of leadership role in terms of going to help her, sort of leaning on his sort of doctorness, saying, you need to take water, all the other bits and pieces type thing. And I guess that, the resolution for that sort of whole interaction is the whole, what about the tail section thing, which I think you mentioned 2 episodes ago when we were talking about the pilot. Yeah. I was like, there's a mystery of that. And I hadn't crossed my mind because I was like, well, there are bits of the plane, but I assume they're gone. It's not sort of thrown anything up. Yeah. But that's them sort of, there could be other people who've survived as well, and you sort of go, it's unlikely, but then it was unlikely that the pilot would be alive in his bit of the plane. So if the pilot's survived in his bit of the plane, it's possible that other people may have survived in their little bit of the plane type thing. One of the bits that confused me, and it only sort of crossed my mind on the second time I watched it, and it was like, do I need to go back and try and figure out what was going on there, was why her husband would have been a completely different section to her. That was the bit that was
it's mentioned in the pilot. It's actually mentioned in the Jack's flashbacks to the crash, or just where she's sitting next to him or near him, and he notices that she's nervous. Yeah, and they have a little bit of dialogue, and she mentions that her husband has gone to the bathroom.
Right. Okay.
And the bathroom is in the back, the rear section of the plane, so that's why.
Right. Okay.
He wasn't in the same area.
I did wonder if there was something about that, because that was a bit. It was like, well, why are we taking on? Because you'd think you'd be sat next to her type thing, and I wasn't. I was like, why is that?
But I think I think those scenes were a nice kind of shading, sort of grey shading of Jack's character as well, where he's clearly got the kind of the manner where he cares of people, almost that kind of doctorly approach of checking the patients. But also, I think the rest of the episode, it's also very much shown that he has no interest in a memorial for.
Yeah, well, I mean that was there was a bunch of little sort of subplots, and the sort of memorial burning of the bodies type thing was one of the more interesting sort of subplots, and it was largely about like how Jack reacted to it. So, I mean, I think his kind of role is to sort of be the doctor, logical approach type person, and so he comes up with we can't bury them because that's not going to do anything. We need to do something about it because it's just attracting wild animals, so we're going to have to burn them. But what's interesting is it's not just that like he doesn't have an interest in, he sort of almost actively wants to avoid being part of the memorial pieces. It's like, this stuff's not for me. And it was, I remember, to me, it was definitely giving the impression that there's something behind, something in the character's past, like, has he just recently suffered a loss or something along those lines, or this sort of bits and pieces? That's the reason why he doesn't want to sort of engage in this sort of bits and bobs there type thing. Just because it wasn't even disinterested, actually seemed like actively trying to go away from it.
Yeah. He's not like, I don't want to be in charge of it, but somebody else should do it. He's not forcing people to do it. He's just like, I'm not interested. I don't.
Yeah. And, for someone who everywhere else has a reasonable bedside manner, for lack of a better term, it does seem like, it's actually an active trying to avoid, as opposed to. So, that made me think that there's probably something that we're going to find out that, I don't know, my assumption was like he's lost someone in some, like a wife or something in recent times. I guess that might be, one of the ongoing sort of questions that gets asked so far is like, why is this person on the plane in the first place? Because it's like from Sydney to America type thing. And so I guess maybe that's like, why was he in Sydney or something like that type thing might be the sort of answer to those bits and pieces, because that seems to be you found out why Locke was, you found out why Kate was. It seems to be the sort of part of the mystery is like, why were they on the plane in the first place?
Yeah, and I think, and the other little bit of kind of characterization we do get out of the like memorial plot is that little bit where Sawyer comes across and gives Claire the wallets with the IDs in for the people, and that I think is quite interesting because earlier we've seen Sawyer basically like looting.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So again,
and you get the nice bit where Saeed is given the photos back.
Yes.
And you see the woman in the photo, which you assume is like a wife or something. There was also I mean, in terms of random subplots, there was a random subplot with, is it Helen, who's the sort of ditzy
Shannon,
and the way she sort of manipulates Charlie into catching the fish type thing.
Yeah.
Sort of bit,
I mean, mainly that's nice. That's like just a little kind of comedy.
Yeah.
Like side plot for the most part, but it's also quite interesting in that like it demonstrates like how Shannon operates. Like she clearly is used to using her feminine wiles, for want of a better way of phrasing it, to kind of get what she wants.
Yeah.
And that is clearly something that
her brother doesn't like.
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember the name of the brother, but
Charlie then ends up basically getting Hurley to catch the fish.
Although I think Charlie was the one who eventually did catch it. I'm not. It's sort of Hurley sort of clearly built the spear and all that stuff and so on. But all of the this is. I mean, part of the reason why I thought it was such a good episode was it sort of addresses. It answers a bunch of questions. One of the questions, early on is like what they're going to do for food type thing, and so it's handy in that. Right. Well, we've resolved that they can catch fish, they can kill boars. So he'd said, there's other things that you can eat, so they'll be foraging and the other bits and bobs there. So that sort of ticks a box in terms of the survival side of things. You also get the nice part from my point of view is like, they haven't forgotten about the message, because they do a little bit of activity in terms of trying to triangulate the signal type thing. And while it doesn't progress anywhere, it's just handy to you get the sort of reminder that it's still out there, and the characters haven't forgotten about it, because
you get the impression that that's kind of ticking along.
They're going to try. At least Saeed is on that case in terms of he wants to find it out. So someone is going to, not Jack, who just like don't care.
I think the thing that I always think is slightly odd. I can't remember whether there's reasoning for it that comes up later, but there's that bit where kind of Saeed is basically like organizing people and saying like, well, okay, we need 3 groups. We need a group for water, we need a group for food, and we need a group to gather electronics so I can try and do this stuff. Although he kind of said that without telling people why he needs the electronics. But he kind of, I think he says, oh, I'll lead the party that's sorting out the water or something. And you're like, why are you not leading the party that's gathering electronics? Because you know what you need.
Possibly just an oversight, but yeah, it does seem. I mean, I think he does give he gives a sort of explanation in that it's trying to build just a transmitter to signal for help, as opposed to try and find this other signal which is blocking their signal for help type thing. But yeah, no, it's interesting in terms of the leadership bits and pieces. But yeah, they've resolved the water, they've resolved food, they've got kind of shelter, so they're going to be hanging around for a while.
The other bit that I always like is there's a little scene, I think it's fairly early on, where we're kind of reminded that Charlie isn't the smartest person, because he asks why they're going to start the fire at night, and people are like, well, we're hoping people are going to see it.
Charlie-wise, like there was one bit like where he writes late on his hand, and I didn't really understand what on earth that was about.
Yeah, so that's something that develops as it goes. And I think not so much this episode, but definitely in the previous episode, you started to get the beginnings of a kind of dynamic that builds up between Claire and Charlie.
Right.
And yeah, I think you said it during the pilot, like at the moment, still Charlie is very kind of almost stereotypical, like drug using member of failed band.
Yes.
And he's not helped in this episode as well, because like I say, he's kind of portrayed as being a bit dim. He's very easy for Shannon to manipulate.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say he does get fleshed out when we get to obviously episodes.
Yeah, I mean it's early days, and I'm assuming that if it follows the same format, there'll be a flashback episode of him coming up in the not too distant future type thing.